would indicate that gold is going to be part of the world reserve currency of the future, just as it has for 5,000 years.
So, Bob, my first question for you is rather simple. It's probably a simple question for you and simple for many of our viewers who have been following the gold market, but I think it sets up our conversation quite nicely nonetheless. So, Bob, what is the reason for buying gold right now in today's current environment?
Because the alternatives are far worse. And that seems like kind of a cop-out, but we have the bond market fixing to crash and the stock market fixing to crash. The cryptocurrencies have lost more money than what's lost in 2008 in the subprime crisis. Gold is an insurance policy against government stupidity. I do not worship gold. Gold is honest money, and I think we're going to go back to honest money, and certainly what the Russians and the Chinese are setting up would indicate that gold is going to be part of the world reserve currency of the future, just as it has for 5,000 years.
World gold reserve currency of the future. We're going to come back to that, Bob. But
Okay.
Going back to what you said about government stupidity, can you outline some of this stupidity that you've observed that may be beneficial for the gold market?
All of it. Okay. This where it gets absolutely silly. The United States has been in constant warfare for the last 22 years. George Bush, who was a draft dodger in Vietnam, I'll give him credit for that, started fighting. We were at war with Iraq and with Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Somalia and Syria. The United States spent $2.3 trillion in Afghanistan, and we couldn't even manage the pullout without looking stupid. We left something like $7 or $8 billion worth of weapons to the people who had been our adversaries for 20 years. For the United States to turn around and believe that we should attack Russia, it's simply insane. The whole Russian-Ukrainian thing, it's totally insane. And it's only been made worse by the sanctions, which are probably the biggest geopolitical mistake in world history. These sanctions are going to have more effect on the lives of everyone in the world than anything that's happened before in history.
Right. Actually, you've lived through Vietnam. We know that after the end of the Bretton Woods, which coincided with the Vietnam War, gold spiked up dramatically, but most people think that that's just simply because that gold was allowed to free float, and so market participants flooded into the market. But I'm wondering, Bob, whether or not you think that war in itself has been or will be a good boost for the market, the gold market, that is.
Well, here's what happens. Every empire ends when they get involved in military adventurism. It happened to the French with their involvement in the Revolutionary War. It happened to the Russians with their involvement in Afghanistan. It happened to the British with their involvement in South Africa. And certainly, I don't think anyone can justify the constant state of war in the last 22 years in the United States. It's crazy. And the United States is doing nothing to end the Ukraine war and everything to prolong it. Here's the key. The United States fights wars to fight wars. When I was in Vietnam, we weren't fighting the communists. We were fighting for DuPont. We were fighting for Convair. We were fighting for DuPont chloroforgin. And strange enough, when all you're doing is trying to use up weapons, the military industrial complex loves it, but it's war and people get killed. There have been millions of people killed by Americans the last 22 years, and we're sitting here pretending a few thousand people killed in Ukraine is some kind of terrible thing. It is terrible, but it's something we started.
Again, I think there's probably some context that needs to be provided here. But okay, so specifically, you were talking about gold as an insurance policy. What exactly are gold investors insuring themselves against? Is it this loss of freedom that's going to come later on in our lifetimes, Bob, that you were just describing? I mean, how does that translate to a higher gold price precisely?
Well, interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily translate into a higher gold price. Gold never changes its value. An ounce of gold, it's worth an ounce of gold. That was true 1,000 years ago. It was true 10 years ago, and it's going to be true 10 years from now. Gold does not change its value. The currencies change value. And certainly you can look at what happened to the cryptocurrencies. These sanctions are going to cause the same problem with the euro and eventually the same problem with the United States. The United States has shot its bolt in Ukraine. Okay, we fired a weapon that we should have never picked up in the first place, and the blowback from the weapon is going to destroy the United States financially. So your choice is going to be: do you want to stack up $100 bills in this hand, or do you want an ounce of gold in this hand? And anybody with any sense is going to go for the gold. All fiat currencies disappear, and every country that gets a reserve currency, the reserve currency lasts for about 75 to 80 years. And the United States has had their 75 to 80 years. The Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians are working on an alternative currency now, and it will absolutely take over, and gold's going to be part of it. Gold is literally economic freedom.
Okay, alternative currency. What kind of alternative currency are they working on, Bob?
Well, here's the deal. Let me read this to you. Okay, This is the meeting that took place last week. The first Eurasia Economic Forum, and your viewers can look that up on Google, was held last week in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Should be regarded as a milestone in setting the parameters for the geoeconomic integration of the Eurasian heartland. These sanctions have effectively moved the economic center of gravity from Europe 5,000 miles to the east, and they've given tremendous power to Iran, to China, to India, and to Russia. The forum discussed the model of a new global settlement currency pegged to baskets of national currencies, commodities. And this is something I've been talking about for 2 months. We're going to go to a gold-backed system because the gold-backed system works, and what we have now doesn't. Now, one of the things that we know is, given the size of the bond market, given the size of the stock market, given the size of the derivatives market, it is a giant balloon running around looking for a pin. And it's going to find that pin. And the question is not whether it's going to blow up. Of course it's going to blow up. You can look at the stock market. The easier prediction in the world is we're going to have a market crash. We haven't started it. We're just barely into it. We're going to do the same thing we did from 1929 to 1932, and the stock market declined 89%. But what everybody forgets is from 1932 to 1933, the stock market went up 150%. When the United States put sanctions on the Russian ruble, the ruble went to a ratio of 160 to $1 US. When Putin came out and started tying the price of oil to gold and demanding payment in rubles, the ruble went from 160 to 60. It was the biggest advance in a currency in the last 30 or 40 years. So we are going to have a new currency that is going to be available to the world. And I would like to remind your viewers, 30 countries out of 195 support the sanctions, and 165 do not support the sanctions. We're in a new world.
Okay, but Bob, this new world economic system that you're talking about, why would it need a gold standard? Keep in mind that we had a gold standard. That was the Bretton Woods system, and Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 70s. So clearly somebody in power back then thought that a gold standard was no longer needed. Why would people now think all of a sudden that it's needed once more?
Gold standards have worked for 5,000 years. The only reason they have ever failed was war start like they did in 1914, and everybody started printing money like drunken sailors. Wars destroy currencies, period. It happened in the Civil War. It happened in the Revolutionary War. It happened in the French Revolution. It happens in every revolution. It happens in every war. They always go back to gold because gold works. Now, most people don't know this. I happen to know a lot of financial trivia. I've got 15 or 20 examples of money or things that used to be money on my walls here. There was currency after the French Revolution in 1789, and it failed. And then there was another currency, and then a French colonel became a dictator. His name was Napoleon. And the very first thing that he did is put France back on a gold and silver standard.